Welcome to Pure Intuitive Talk with me, Trish Smith. I'm a multi-dimensional channeler sharing my gift to assist others to connect and work with their whole being, helping bring them into a beautiful way of high-frequency living. Immerse yourself in an hour of nourishment that feeds your spiritual journey and invites you to embrace your empowered soul. You'll feel armed with new understandings for how to shift from pain to love as we explore topics from shamanic sound healing to gut health. Are you ready to take accountability for the impact that we have on the world around us and learn new tools and techniques to feel whole again? Of course you are, and you're in the right place. Pure Intuitive Talk starts now. Hey everybody, welcome back to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith, and you're tuned into Transformation Talk Radio right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Today, our episode is about awakening our selves, like awakening our spirit towards living in alignment with the divine, right? Like living in alignment with the divine within ourselves, within our communities on this planet, having those conversations with the sacred, with God, source, spirit, however you want to term it. So there's so much language, right, all over our globe on how we speak about source or God or whatever the languages that we're using. So I think sometimes that tends to divide us, and I don't want to do that. I want to speak globally and universally when I'm talking about God energy and tuning into that frequency. So there's going to be 4 segments in this show. And for the first segment, I wanted to talk about just that, and that's tuning into God frequency, because if we're going to live in alignment, we need to spend a lot of our time, if not all of our time, being tuned into that frequency as much as possible. And sometimes that's called like living life as a prayer. That's living in alignment, right? Being tuned into higher frequencies. So there's tons of language around that too. And the thing is, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what we're calling it or how it prescribes to us. At the end of the day, it just matters that we know inside of ourselves that we are spending that time tuned into that higher frequency so that we are the best version of ourselves, right? So that we are being the human, being the friend, being the lover, the person that we want to be in the world. Like Gandhi said, right? Be the change you want to see. We have to do just that in all areas of our life. And it's not always easy, right? There's times that are very difficult for people. There's things that are very challenging to get through. I personally had a very challenging 2023, and I'm grateful that some of those challenges have come to pass, right? However, during those challenges, it wasn't easy. There's times that it's really easy to tune into God frequency, and it's really easy to tune into gratitude, right? And have gratitude for everything, because you feel blessed in those times that are going smoothly, and you can look around and go, yeah, it's good. Everything's going great. And when someone asks you how you're doing, you get to answer that truthfully. How are you? I'm doing really good. We're doing really well. Our family's great. And there's other times when someone asks how you're doing and you're really not doing well. And so if you answer by saying, yeah, we're doing great, it's not necessarily truthful. But then at the same time, sometimes it's easier to answer in that fashion. And then when we know people that we're very close to and they ask us how we're doing, we maybe open up and say things like, having a really hard time, things have been very difficult, we've got these challenges going on, and then share those with our loved ones, right? So there's just times that are going to be more challenging to tune into gratitude and tune into God frequency. But those times are some of the most important times to tune in and to hang on, sometimes for dear life, sometimes by the hair on our chinny chin chin. But tuning in and hanging on to those frequencies and hanging on to our relationship with the divine is how we can best survive those times. So there's definitely times where we are surviving, right? And then there's times where we're living and we're thriving. But being able to recognize that during those times where we're literally surviving, right? Like, I've just got to get through this. I've just got to get through this. And then there are people around the globe that are surviving all the time. That's their life, right? And so for us here in the United States, typically we're fed, we're sheltered, we're clothed. And so we're not necessarily in survival mode for those reasons of lack of those resources. So sometimes maybe we feel like we're in survival mode because of our circumstances, and that sends our body into fight or flight, and we end up with high cortisol levels and all of those other good things, right? So in order for us to go through the times where we are being challenged by life circumstances, the best thing that we can do for ourselves, for our body, for our mind, for our spirit, is to tune into that high frequency, right? Eating high frequency foods and spending time in prayer, spending time in meditation, because those light energies are going to help our body, mind, and spirit stay as healthy as possible through the most challenging times of our life, right? So there's definitely something to be said about the challenging times. And I hope that for you listening, that maybe you're not having to go through that right now, but if you are, I just want to serve as a reminder to stay tuned into those frequencies. And so I kind of wanted to play around a little bit with how we can shift our frequencies. So for myself, I have, I don't know, a handful, several different, many different ways that I can shift my frequency. But I don't know if you've ever played around with these things. And so one of the easy ways is to really just use our own imagination, right? And so we can choose to tune into love. We can choose to tune into fear. We can choose to tune into faith. So there's all these different frequencies, right? Joy, gratitude, overwhelm, right? Like there's all these different feelings, and it's just like changing that radio station. So if we go ahead and stay in the frequency that we're in and not recognize that we have a choice to change that frequency, we can really get stuck. And if we go ahead and get ourselves stuck, it's going to be that much harder to pull ourselves out of the deep frequencies, those dark, heavy frequencies, and move ourselves into the lighter frequencies when the challenge has passed. So that being said, I wanted to go ahead and take a moment to play around with some frequency shifting tools. So one that I like to use is closing my eyes, lowering my gaze, and just thinking about something maybe that is fearful for me, and just allowing my mind to have that time with the thought process of something that is fearful, and recognize what that feels like in my body, recognize where I'm feeling that in my body, pay attention to my breath, right? So I can go down this little rabbit hole just for a few minutes, tuning into that frequency, having myself feel afraid of something, or having myself feel very sad about something, bringing up a thought process that's painful, right? Where it's something that's hurt my feelings, and then tune into that frequency, stay there, feel where it feels in my body, and, just recognize again, where am I feeling that in my body? And then I like to go ahead and start tuning into the thought process of being inspired, right? Of feeling hopeful, of having faith, right? And so spending a few minutes there, and then maybe shifting back to a couple of more, it's just almost like practice where I can utilize my own skills in shifting frequency, because the more we do it, the better we get at it, just like anything else, right? So sometimes even if I'm going to fall asleep at night, I will play around with shifting my frequency just so that I keep myself in practice, right? Just like I do with my breathing techniques. But if you pay attention to everything that you're feeling in your body when you're spending time in these different emotions or frequencies, then you'll know what it feels like to shift out of them, right? So now, if I've practiced spending a few minutes in fear, and then I've practiced spending a few minutes in pain, and if I've practiced spending a few minutes in joy, right? And then gratitude, and then spending that frequency, communicating with the divine, feeling where they're at in my body, it becomes familiar. And so if I can recognize the difference in them, I can go into what feels good as I choose, right? Like even in the middle of a really challenging time, I can take the time out. I can tune into the frequency that I want to feel, right? Because again, with energy, it's like if you feed it, it grows. So the more we're feeding those dark energies, the more we're going to feel stuck there and we're going to stay there. And so if we take the time to practice shifting out of them, the better we'll get at shifting out of them. So if you want to go ahead and play with that at home, practice it, try it for yourself. I hope that it can serve you. If you have any questions about it, you can always reach out to me. My website is trishsmithcoach.com, and I'm happy to work with you on playing with your frequencies. So I didn't want to go into too much detail or give details about things that could cause fear frequency and sad, painful frequency, just because I didn't want to trigger anybody listening to the show today. However, it is a very basic, easy to use technique that will help you in times when you feel like you want to be able to shift your frequency. So it's just a tool to add to your tool belt. So another thing too that I wanted to discuss was getting out of our own way, right? So sometimes we're the one, let's say most of the time, we're the ones blocking ourselves, right? So we come up with all these reasons in our mind why we can't get into these frequencies. And the truth is that if we spend enough time sitting there and listening to Source, listening to God, that we will find ourselves in those frequencies, right? We'll find ourselves communing with the divine. Even I have many friends and family who were raised in the Catholic Church, and they were taught how to pray certain ways. And so I've asked, right? Like, so don't you hear what God says? And I've been given the answer, no, I don't, by many people. And so it's really just as simple as sitting and listening. And I've taught many people, it's not me, it's no magic. It's available to every single one of us, listening to hear what Spirit has to tell us. It's really just a matter of taking the time of sitting down and listening. And I can promise you that if you sit down and listen long enough, and it's your intention to hear what Spirit has to offer you, that those things will come, right? And it's like anything else, it's a practice. So I encourage you to sit down, to listen, to spend time in that frequency. And the more that we stay in that frequency as a collective, the higher the frequency will come and all over our planet. And by that, we'll experience so much more healing as a collective. So if we want peace, right? If we're somebody that wishes peace for our planet, then we first have to have peace within ourselves so that we're radiating that frequency, right? So if we're radiating a peaceful frequency, those around us, is contagious like everything else. Those around us will start to move into that peaceful frequency. It just gets passed on, right? Which is another thing to be said about the importance of when we are going through those challenging times, to be able to communicate it in a way that we are not lashing out at people, and that we're not creating frequencies that we don't want to put out into the world. So we have to just be careful, because even in our most challenging times, if we're hanging on to God, if we're holding on tight to that communication, and we're allowing ourselves to go through it and to feel the pain and to learn from the pain and learn the lesson from the challenge, that's still very high frequency, right? So over the course of 2023, in January, I ended up suffering what they believe was a non-epileptic seizure, right? So there were some different things happening in my brain. Then we also went through some challenges within our family, some mental illness situations, and they've been very challenging. And for myself, utilizing my brain in different ways after the non-epileptic seizure, it was more challenging for me to tune into that frequency. I'm grateful that this has been a practice of mine throughout my life. And so I was able to find my way. But it takes a lot of work. And I am happy to report that getting through 2023, I was able to get through it by utilizing all of my tools and not ending up in the position that I was in 20 years ago, where I'd been attacked and kidnapped and I had PTSD and I didn't know it yet. And I was going through challenges and I was going through pain and suffering. And I was lashing out. I was lashing out at everybody and everything around me. And I was burning bridges and hurting my relationships. And so 20 something years later, I get to say that I just went through a very challenging year for myself. And because I practiced all my tools, because I held on to my relationship with the divine, because I clung tight to gratitude, that I can look back over the last year and proudly say that I did not damage my relationships. I did not lash out at people. I didn't burn bridges. And so it just comes with time. It comes with practice and it comes with time, but it's really important. And we just celebrated Christmas, right? Most of us. And I was actually so touched. I received a gift from a really dear friend of mine, and who knows me really intimately. And she had gotten me some of my favorite chocolates for Christmas, which I really, really appreciated. And actually, I have the card here. I'm going to read it because I don't want to miss a word of it. It says, "Merry Christmas to an amazing friend. You inspire me by how you handle everything life throws at you. I love you so much, Trish. I'm here for you if you need me. Love and hugs," from my dear friend. And I told her, I said, you know what? I said, I think I'm going to post that little note up on my mirror, because there were many times throughout the year that I did not feel like I was doing an amazing job at handling what life was throwing at me. But from someone who's known me so long and so intimately, that felt like a really huge compliment. And so I said, I'm going to refer to it when I forget, right? And so I would also like to encourage you that when people give you a compliment, to take it in, right? I'm not very good at taking in compliments. And so I'm going to utilize this card for just that. I'm going to put it somewhere where I can see it and remind myself that even though I had a really hard time, I did hold on to the divine. I did be the best version of myself through a really challenging time. So the best version of myself over 2023 was like nothing fantastico. It wasn't like, oh, wow, like I moved mountains or anything. But at the same time, I can look back without regrets. And that's really important to be able to do when we're being faced with some really serious challenges in our lives. I also wanted to talk about self-discipline. I'm like, hold on, I have it written down here somewhere. But I wanted to talk about self-discipline because if we're not being disciplined, right? If we're not disciplining ourselves to stay true to our practices, to sit down with our prayer, to sit down with our meditation, to utilize our breathing techniques or exercise or eating right. If we're not doing those things, that's when the shit hits the fan. That's when things start going awry. That's when you do start burning the bridges. And I'm not kidding you. I was so overwhelmed some of these times. I was absolutely not the best version of myself, but I was certainly the best version of myself for the circumstances I was going through, right? And that was because I held on to the practices that do the most for me. So there are other things that sometimes when we're in survival mode, we have to let go of, right? It's like, well, the laundry's not up to date, the dishes aren't up to date. So there's things that we know can wait, and there's things that we know that have to be taken care of immediately. So I have things I'm still catching up on from December. Our month was totally nuts. We had a new grandson come in. He was premature, came in 6 weeks early. So I was back and forth to the hospital every day and had a lot of other things going on, also the busiest month of the year. So there's things I'm still catching up on, but knowing I was in survival mode was a huge help to me, just knowing that, right? So if we know ourselves, knowing we're in survival mode, knowing that we're just going to do the bare minimum, choose those bare minimum things wisely, right? Like, know what can wait, know what can't wait, and take care of those things. But if we don't get after ourselves, who's going to do that, right? Who's going to say, hey, go get some good food in you, go get that water in you? And so we have to practice self-discipline. And that's the only way that we're going to find success with our self-development, right? Also, too, I wanted to consider, right, like the co-creating factor. So there's the universe, right? And there's our angels and our guides and Jesus and all of the people that are on the other side, the unseen, that are helping us. But sometimes we forget that life's not just happening to us, that we are in fact co-creators, that we have free will. And so I think it's important to remember that we also have a choice, right? And creating the life that we want to live and creating who we want to be, right? And sometimes in certain people's lives around the world, they don't have quite the choices we have, which is why I personally like to honor that, right? I just like to honor that I live in a place where I get to choose so many things. I have so many choices here. And I feel like I would be doing a disservice to people around the globe that don't have the opportunities that I have if I wasted them, if I didn't take them, if I wasn't grateful for them. And so that being said, I get to create, in some ways, the life that I want to live. And we certainly all get to be who we want to be, right? So even if I have choice over nothing else in my life, I certainly have choice in who I am. And that, for me, I want to be a person who is committed to my relationship with the divine, who is committed to my relationships with my family and my friends. And so that is where my priorities lie. But I wanted to remind us that we are co-creating and that we get to have that choice. So if you're at home and you're feeling overwhelmed, like you don't have any options and you don't have choice and everything's happening to you, take a minute, go inside, sit with the divine, listen to God, listen to what spirit has for you. There's so many people on the other side that we can't see that are working in our favor, right? I call them breadcrumbs, those synchronicities that we get to see. You guys know that when you're like, things start giving you the path, right? And it starts opening up, you start seeing it. It's like, oh, there's that 1111, right? There's that hummingbird that popped into my window on a day that you wouldn't normally see hummingbirds, right? Like all of those little synchronicities, and you follow those breadcrumbs. Those are all of your divine spirits guiding you, helping you, showing you the way, saying like, we're here, we've got you. And so even through the depths of hell that I was going through in 2023 at certain moments, and that's the hard part with the PTSD, is sometimes if I'm triggered, things can certainly feel more overwhelming than they actually are, on top of the situation being so overwhelming. And so it's just important to keep our eyes open. And by our eyes, I include our third eye, because we are going to keep our eyes available for those synchronicities so that spirit can communicate with us in the best way possible, right? And so staying open to the divine in all the ways is a very beautiful, smooth, easy way to stay in those high frequencies. So I know sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not as easy. But I would just like to encourage you and inspire you over this next year, if you're going through challenging times, because things will pop up, to hang on to the divine, hang on, stay in those frequencies, maybe practice some breathing techniques, right? Whenever we're breathing, right? Anytime our exhale is longer than our inhale, we're signaling our body to get out of fight or flight, right? We're stimulating our parasympathetic nervous system. So utilizing those breathing techniques, utilizing dancing, utilizing shaking, utilizing sound, right? So there are so many ways that we can shift our own frequency, and what those ways are for you, right? For me, sometimes I've got to dance it out in my kitchen. I've got to dance it out, get it out, and move forward, because those energies will try to stick on you. And it's our job to say nope and get them off, get them out, right? Again, that's where the self-discipline comes in. So I've only got a couple of minutes till we go to break. My name is Trish Smith. You're listening to Pure Intuitive Talk. Sorry, tongue twister. This is Transformation Talk Radio, and welcome to 2024. I know we all just got here, but it's going to be a lot, right? We've got a whole year ahead of us, and we don't know what could happen. Beautiful things, crazy things, challenging things. But we do know that we can do this, that we can get through anything. The last few years have really turned the world upside down, and half of us are still trying to sort out what even went down, right? People have come out of caves that they've been living in for the last few years. I feel like things are opening up and people are opening back up, and it's been beautiful to witness. And so I just hope for you that this next year holds so much joy and so many blessings. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be back in a couple minutes. And when we get back, we'll be talking about the energy of anger, which sounds like it might be awful, but in fact, the energy of anger can be very useful. So stay tuned and we'll get back to you in just a minute. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith, and you are currently tuned into Transformation Talk Radio. Before we went to the break, we were talking about tuning into God frequency, talking about being in those high frequencies, living from those places as much as possible, and utilizing shifting our frequencies as a tool and in working with staying in alignment, right? And living in alignment. Another emotion that comes up for us, another energy that we often feel is anger. And it's interesting because anger holds so much power, right? It's actually a very powerful source of energy. In fact, it was Max Lucado who said, there's a point at which anger ceases to be an emotion and becomes a driving force. And so sometimes we know those people in our lives. Maybe we are that person sometimes in our lives where we're literally like, it's our energy source, right? We're just like living off of anger, right? Like letting that drive us, letting us, move through life, just being pissed, right? So I think we all know how powerful the energy of anger can be. And it can become very destructive. We all know that. If we have lack of self-discipline, if we allow our anger to take over and we're not tuned into that energy enough to be aware of our own behavior, then it can be very destructive, and it can certainly burn bridges and destroy relationships, and it can cause really ugly behavior issues, right? So that's not what I want to go over. I don't want to talk about all of that, but what I want to talk about is the anger that comes up within us, that in different ways that we can use it in healthy options, right? So anger is just that. It's just energy. Even like anxiety, right? Like anxiety comes up, we can tune into our body, we can listen to the energy and go, okay, like I feel really anxious. Okay, well, it's a lot of energy being given to us, and we can utilize it in any way we want. So we can decide to feel really anxious, or we can decide to feel excited. So as long as we're tuning in and paying attention, we can take that energy and use it in the way that we want to, right? Because we are the alchemists in our own vessel. So the thing is about anger energy, is that there's layers of it, right? There's surface energy, there's things that should cause us to be angry, there's underneath that sometimes is the depths of anger for injustice. So what I like to do is lean into it. It's very rare that I feel angry, but over the last year of going through so many challenges, I had to put some things on the back burner. And then I started getting frustrated with myself because I wasn't getting other things completed that were also important, right, during certain times. So for myself over the last year, I started noticing, because like, again, it's very rare that I feel angry. And I had some circumstances in my life that I felt were unjust. And I recognized, I'm starting to feel irritable. And I'm like, okay, these reasons are good reasons. But then I had to sit with it longer, right? I leaned into it. Yeah, okay. I recognize that I'm frustrated with people's behaviors in certain ways, and I wish that things were different. But that's not it, right? Like, that's not the source of this. That's just the surface layer. So I leaned into it a little harder, right? Ah, I'm very upset with the way I was being treated by a couple of people. It's okay. But I noticed there was more than that, right? So I go in and I really lean into it and I really feel it. And at the end of the day, the real anger was coming from being angry with myself, being frustrated with myself because I wasn't accomplishing things that I needed to actually accomplish that were very important, because I'd had to put them on the back burner, right? So what that told me was, it's time, right? I've gotten through the places that were really challenging where I was having to put those things on the back burner, but my body was signaling, it's time now. Here's the energy that you need to go and accomplish and execute these things that you had to put on the back burner, right? So we use it, right? We can use it for our good, but we can't use it for our good if we only see the top layer of it and we're like, ugh, everybody's annoying and we're getting irritated with everybody around us, right? How are we going to use that energy for good if we don't look into it, if we don't lean into it, if we don't listen to it, and then utilize it in its greatest power, right? It's hard to describe, but if I could describe it, I would say it's basically going to the source, right? So you're peeling off those layers, and by the time you get down to what's pure, right? Maybe even like water, right? There's like the mucky stuff at the top, but you go under, and where the water is not having, stuff floating around, or maybe the stuff settles and the stuff at the top's cleaner, right? So there's it's convoluted sometimes. Our emotions, our energies, they're convoluted, and we have to sift through those top layers to get through to the pure part so that we can utilize what source is giving us, right? Because most of the time the energies that are coming into us are a gift, and we're just not remembering how to use them correctly. So the thing is about feeling angry, feeling frustrated all the time, and not doing the things that we know we're supposed to be doing, and so then we get frustrated with ourselves, right? Is that we may continue doing that as long as we're not getting mad enough, tired enough of it to keep doing it. But then the day comes where we're like sick and tired of being stuck in the same pattern, and then that's when we get after ourselves, right? That's when it's like, Trish, go sit down with those papers, get them sorted out, fill out that application, right? And we get after ourselves, but we don't have to wait until it gets to that point. We can stay on top of our things, utilize that self-discipline before it gets to the point where we have to get after ourselves, right? But for me personally, I've been through so many changes over the last year that I am now like, all right, where am I at now looking forward? Because something had to take my attention, and now it's no longer having to take my attention. So now I'm like, okay, let me get organized. It just happens to be January, the perfect time of year, right? That's what everybody talks about, is these resolutions. I've personally never made resolutions because I know myself better. Like, I'm not going to make a new resolution in January and then follow it. I am going to, in very important times in my life, make a promise to myself and then uphold that promise, right? But I do know that there are a lot of people that start off January trying to build a new life for themselves. And I hope to encourage you that while you're building this new life for yourself, while you're co-creating with the divine, becoming the person you want to be, building the life that you want to live, that you can lean into the anger, right? If you're feeling frustrated, go under it. If you're feeling overwhelmed, go under it, go into it. And utilizing the source of that energy will help you accomplish the things that you are designed to accomplish, right? Because we're all put here with our gifts that we bring in and to serve each other and our families and our own lives, right? So that being said, I would like us to all continue fighting the good fight, right? Sometimes that anger comes from things that are unjust, right? My aunt used to tell me all the time, she's like, you really have anger issues with justice. Like, you have justice issues. I'm like, I really do. I'm very protective and I do have justice issues. And the thing of it is, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's important that if we see the innocent being mistreated, right? If like children, animals, our planet, right? Men, women who are being abused, right? I think it's important that that anger is there for us. It was given to us to act. It was given to us to act toward correcting injustice, right? And protecting the innocent. And so I don't want to ever get myself to the point where I believe I should never be angry, right? Because there are things that genuinely should make us angry. And if people are being mistreated, then we need to move into action. And if we've decided to suppress any feelings of anger, we're not going to have that passion. We're not going to be the person that moves into action and protects the innocent. And I don't want to see that. I want to see everybody utilizing the energies that were given to us to move into action and protect the innocent. So we do have another break that we're going to. My name is Trish Smith. You're listening to Pure Intuitive Talk on Transformation Talk Radio. Thank you for tuning in. When we get back, we'll be talking about forgiveness and having patience with ourselves. So stay tuned in. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith, and right now you are tuned into Transformation Talk Radio. Thank you for being here. Happy January 2024. If you're watching this, that's already been recorded. Maybe it's another month and another year. But right now, for us, currently we're bringing in a new year, and it does feel good for me personally to bring in a new year after a difficult year for myself. And I know that many people have had a few difficult years now, and I'm hoping that things are clearing up in your world. I'm hoping that things are starting to go smoother and that you're able to lean into the frequencies we've been talking about, that you've been able to spend more time with feeling gratitude and feeling joy and laughter and whatnot, because laughter is the best medicine, right? So I love those ways to release. Like I'll cry now, I'll laugh now. I grew up not crying. We weren't supposed to be crying, so that took a lot to learn how to cry. But laughing, right? Laughing. I hope we're doing tons of that in 2024. So this last segment, I wanted to talk about forgiveness, right? So if we're taking the time and our intention is to live in alignment, right? That is going to really have to contain forgiveness, right? There's only a few things that we really, really, really need to hang on to that have to be a priority if we're going to live a life of living in alignment. And forgiveness is really right there at the top of that list. So forgiving ourselves and forgiving others. The thing is about not offering forgiveness is, as we know, it ends up living in us, right? So now we have hate living in our heart. We have resentment living in our heart. And I am not saying that there are things that are not forgivable, right? Or that are, but let me try to say that. I'm not saying that everything's forgivable, right? I do believe that there are circumstances of things that have happened to people and things that people do to other people or animals or, the planet that are unforgivable, right? They are. And so I'm not advocating for, go ahead and forgive the person that attacked you, the person that abused you. I'm not saying necessarily that go ahead and forgive them. It's okay, right? But we maybe then take the time to forgive ourselves for holding on to the hate or the resentment, right? So the truth is that we don't want to live in the frequency of hate, because if we're living in the frequency of hate, if we're living in the frequency of resentment, then we are not getting to live in the frequency of love, right? And that's where we want to live. We want to live in the love frequency. We want to live in the joy frequency and the divine frequency as much as possible, right? It's life. We're being torn in different directions most of the time in our society. But coming back home, right? Coming back to center, coming back to source, coming back to our connection to the divine. It's going to take forgiveness sometimes, right? So myself, I've had to forgive myself for things in my life. I've certainly had to forgive others. And like so many of you, I've had to forgive so many times, more times than I can count, with situations where an apology was never offered, right? And so that's not always easy to do. But I do believe like my discernment comes in handy. And I hope for yourself as well that you're able to discern, right? Like when somebody does you wrong, when someone hurts your feelings, that you're able to look at the overall picture, know them well enough, decide whether or not the situation is petty, right? Decide whether or not you were just being over emotional, and your feelings were hurt easily, or maybe they did. Maybe they really hurt you badly, and they didn't mean to, right? Because sometimes people are young, sometimes people are in a hard place and they're going through their own hell and they're lashing out, and they certainly never meant to hurt you, right? So being able to use your discernment and sometimes recognize, right? Like Jesus said, forgive them for they know not what they've done. And that is the truth. Sometimes that is the truth. And the truth is that sometimes people do know what they're doing, right? And they intentionally hurt others. And there is obviously evil as well, right? So some of the people that are abusing children, all of the people that are abusing children, there is evil living in them, right? And so it's not forgive them for they know not what they've done. It's they're participating in an evil act and they're destroying somebody's life, right? So the thing is, if we are experiencing pain and suffering from a person that we love dearly and they're not intending to hurt us, then it's easier to find that place of forgiveness, right? It's also very important to find that place of forgiveness so that we can maintain our relationships over decades, right? Because what we do want is to have relationships with our friends and family and neighbors that last decades. We want to have long-term, lasting, deep, committed relationships that we can treasure. And so if we're going to have those experiences of having friendships that last decades, there's definitely going to be some times where we need to offer forgiveness. And I think it's really important to remember that we have to forgive ourselves sometimes, right? And again, there's times where there's something that's been done to us that we would consider unforgivable. And in that case, look into shifting our frequency to joy, just so simply that we get to live there. Because if you've been the victim of a violent crime, you certainly don't deserve to live the rest of your life having to feel the resentment and the hate towards the person that has already hurt you. So I hope to encourage you to recognize that what they did was evil, recognize that it's unforgivable, then choose to live in a frequency of love because you deserve that, right? You don't deserve to live in a frequency of hate and resentment because somebody else violated you, okay? So all that being said, I know I don't have a ton of time. This is my last segment, but patience, right? So utilizing patience with ourselves, patience with others, being able to be that strong person in our family when other people are going through their hard times, to offer that forgiveness, have patience for their process, and be able to maybe take a step back and wait for them to come back to their selves, right? I've had friends in the past, and I've also been the person that is going through a really hard time. And I've had friends that weren't their best selves. I've been the person at times where I wasn't my best self. And I really appreciated people that stood by me and knew that underneath all of like Trish complaining or venting, right, that underneath it, I'm a good person who's always going to do the right thing. And they hung on and they stayed in the relationship, knowing that, you know, the day will come where she's cheery again, right? And I've been able to do that for a handful of my friends over the years, knowing like, you know, they're not their best selves right now, but I know what they're going through, and I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be waiting on the sidelines and try to be the wind under their wings, right? But not take what they're going through personally, because I already know that they're having a really hard time. And so offering that patience for others, offering myself patience, is one of the other ways that we can stay in alignment, right? So if we're choosing that path, right, that sacred path of living in alignment, we're going to have to exercise our patience. And I know for myself, I'm pretty good at offering everybody else patience but myself. And so I'm also speaking to myself when I'm saying, offer patience to yourself, right? So sometimes we even need that reminder. And so that's all I'm here today doing, is serving as that reminder to you. I don't believe that I typically get on here and say things you've never heard in your life. I believe that God has sent me as a messenger to remind you of what you do know, to remind you of the things that are going on inside of our soul that are important, that maybe we're forgetting when we get busy, especially in our culture, right? Another thing I also wanted to touch on before we go is when we're having patience, right? When we're looking at ourselves, when we're looking at others, to make sure that we're also recognizing that we live in a time where our bodies in our culture, because of our diet, are so inflamed, right? And so remembering like, well, wait a minute, is this really true? And spending more time with our thought processes, spending more time with our emotions, and really looking at them and kind of, you know, validating them sometimes, like, wait, oh, okay, I'm just being emotional, you know? So with our gut linings being so inflamed, right, we've got that gut to brain axis, and we're feeling like maybe our gut instincts tells us somebody's, you know, being rude. However, it's like we're just agitated because we're so full of inflammation. Now we're projecting our stuff onto them. And so be careful with that. Be careful. Recognize when it's like, no, it's you, right? I mean, I think I've talked about that before. It's like you look around, you go, oh, everybody's annoying. Oh, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm irritable, right? So I think it's just a nice reminder at the beginning of the year to check ourselves, right? Check ourselves, make sure that we're doing our part, make sure that we're offering forgiveness, that we're staying tuned into the divine frequency as much as possible, that when anger arises, we utilize that power inside of us to go take action into doing what's right for ourselves, our family, and our community, and the world, right? And I've got one more minute, so I'm going to say my goodbyes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to the message. And I think that's all I've got today. I know I'm running out of time. So you're listening to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith, and you're tuned into Transformation Talk Radio. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Pure Intuitive Talk with me, Trish Smith, your Pure Intuitive Guide. Come back and join us for encouragement to take responsibility and to connect to your whole being. Remember that every moment is the right moment to choose peace, acceptance, and forgiveness. We all have the courage to look deep within, get real with ourselves, and make upgrades to our ways of interacting with the world. It's been my privilege to share this hour with you. For more information about me, go to pureintuitiveguide.com. That's pureintuitiveguide.com. Thanks again, and we will see you here next time on Transformation Talk Radio.